I took a trip down to Baja with a friend, and we were in true desert. And I remember my first thought was, this is where my bones are going to end up.
Wow.
So I have a strong affinity for the desert.
Hi, and welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, a weekly conversation with women who found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode 89. If you'd like more information about the podcast, it's all at the website desertladydiaries.com, and I invite you to engage with the guests, with other listeners, or me on social media, on Facebook and Instagram at Desert Lady Diaries, or on Twitter at Desert Lady Diary. Adriene Jenik is an artist and educator who resides in the southwestern U.S. desert. Her computer and media art spans 3 decades, including pioneering work in interactive cinema and live telematic performance. Adriene's current creative research projects include data humanization performances, immersive learning experiments, and street performances reading climate futures with her Eco Tarot deck. At Arizona State University, she serves as professor of intermedia in the School of Art, affiliate faculty in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society, and a sustainability scientist at the Global Institute of Sustainability. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Dawn.
What was your first experience with desert?
So I am from New Jersey. We just talked about that briefly. And the desert was really more in literature and poetry and in my imagination. But my first experience of the physical desert would have been when I moved to Los Angeles in the late 80s. I took a trip down to Baja with a friend, and we were in true desert. And I remember my first thought was, this is where my bones are going to end up.
Wow.
So I have a strong affinity for the desert.
What brought you to Joshua Tree and the Mojave Desert?
So I was living in Los Angeles and lived with a bunch of other rock and rollers in a pretty cool apartment in East Hollywood. And my friend Fred Drake, who started the Rancho de la Luna out here, he started to come out. A bunch of us, Teddy Quinn, a bunch of us started to come out also with him. And after I went back to the East Coast to do my graduate degree, when I came back, I had in mind that I wanted to have a place to write or some place to go out here. And so that was in January of 1996, and I was able to get my place, and I've had a place ever since then.
And now you spend a lot of time over in Arizona, well, some time in Arizona teaching.
Yeah, that's my gig. I have a great gig. I teach 1 term a year, so 4 months out of the year, and then the rest of the time I'm here based in the high desert.
That's fantastic. Coming here since mid to late 80s?
Early 90s,
moved,
yeah.
Okay, early 90s. Talk to me about some of the change you've seen. Good or bad? I mean,
pretty much everything's changed. And the park. I mean, that's more than 20 years. So it was the monument. All of us oldsters still kind of refer to it sometimes as the monument. So you literally could just get in line to go up and drive up and camp for as long as you wanted. And there was no fees and none of that. So shortly after that, the park was created, which I'm super happy about that. It's very exciting that we have that stewardship. But yeah, it was the monument when I first started coming up, hanging out on Holly Road and Joshua Tree at the Rancho de la Luna. If we saw a car drive by, we probably knew who was in it.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, lots of big and small changes. Yeah.
Right. Was the Saloon here then and in the iteration it is now, or was it different?
The Saloon was there. I didn't really go to the Saloon at all. There was some place called Winner's Circle, which is where Crossroads is now. The Beatnik Cafe just came while I started to come, Jeremy's Beatnik Cafe, that's what it was originally called. And then it went through several other different iterations until it got brought back to being the Beatnik. There was no internet, and so that's partly why there were not so many people around then, too, because nobody before then could figure out how to work up here. Right. So as soon as that was a big shift when people were able to start getting reliable internet. Yeah.
More like work at home kind of people.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. So that brought, there's just been waves of people. And again, it's all some great things and some not so great things.
What do you feel like are, because I feel like now
and I'm only been here, it'll be 3 years the end of July, I say to myself, I feel like I got here too late. I feel like I got here too late. So tell me what I missed.
Right.
You know, tell me the good stuff and what's different now that is missing from like the heydays or glory days when you first started coming up.
I mean, it's interesting always to look back at like a kind of scene. You didn't necessarily know that was what it was when you were involved in it at the beginning. So I'd say, I mean, I think part of some of these things have changed, but they also still residues of them stay. So absolutely, we all depended on each other. Anybody that was out here, you just were really dependent on each other because there wasn't Home Depot, there wasn't the grocery stores, there wasn't all the stuff that there is that makes convenience and, I mean, relative convenience and stuff. Like, that stuff really didn't exist so much. Some of us didn't even really have cars or good cars or whatever because there were different times of our lives. And also just learning how to get water, how to do any of that stuff. Like, none of the city or county structures were set up the way that they are now. So we all really depended on each other, for sure. So it really made for this community, very, you know, again, small community. I mean, I would say at that time it was just, especially around the Rancho, I mean, I don't know if you've heard much of the mythos of that, but it was an extremely creative spot. And it also was like the crossroads. Basically, anybody that was creative that was driving into town stopped there at any time of the day or night. And Frederick, who was an angel, my brother, who passed away from complications related to AIDS early in his life. But he lasted for a long time to make like a real legacy there at the Rancho. And that wasn't just rock and rollers like it is now. It was also filmmakers and artists and poets and all kinds of, basically anybody that was creative, like sort of that was a sort of center place where everything jumped off kind of from there. And also, yeah, like I said, that spontaneity of just going up into the park and I think just the quiet, it was really quiet.
Right.
And so...
and dark.
And dark and, all those things. It's still, relatively quiet, relatively dark. I live in 29, so I'm still... Right. But I think, it was interesting then, too, because you would tell people, you come out here and go, why would you want to be up there? That place is, it was really... Nobody wanted to be here then. So, it was really, people didn't understand why you were going out there. They didn't...
Or people come out here because they don't want to be, I don't know, I'm just going to say, there's illegal activity all around.
Sure.
And I think that's another, maybe gangs from San Bernardino and stuff like that, kind of coming out and making their places out here that... Yeah,
I mean, I think the desert is like live and let live. It's like, ex-cons, I mean, people with the past, whatever, like all people with spiritual practices, people, maybe some of us did illicit drugs back then, there's lots of space for all of us to be able to exist. And it was very live and let live. And the other thing, is this, there actually was all those little homestead cabins on 5 acres that people would actually do rent to own for $100 a month. So partly even how the residue of our, at least in Joshua Tree, the artist culture remains, I always tell people, is because so many artists and creatives were able to get those deals early on. And so even as like the waves of rent increases and all the real estate stuff and all has happened, that there's still people that got in like super early, and so the whole culture didn't have to change. So, I mean, obviously it's changed a lot, but there still retains like at the center this idea of this kind of cultural center. And that in a lot of places that I've lived before was totally gentrified out. And I do think because so many artists were able to get these kind of really crazy deals that you just really couldn't resist, because how could you? With people keeping the own note, you didn't even have to have proper mortgage. I mean, it was very funky, but it also enabled people to get these little cabins for $100 a month, fix them up, and have a little place that they could live in. And
that's why I feel like I got here too late.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's been quite a while since that was the case. So, yeah.
So, and we also are kind of we're known as a kind of a community who comes together to fend off and fight off other threats to what may be coming. For example, we were able to say case closed on the Altamira 248 home gated community development successfully, but it was a 10 or 12 year battle with a number of people in town seriously fighting and people chipping in anywhere from $10 to $200. And I find that is a very attractive part of this community for me, that people do come together to stand for, no, this is our community and that is not appropriate here. It's not the kind of community we are. Was there any of that going on when there was the designation of a national park versus, keeping it a monument? Did any of that?
No, I mean, it was very, again, I mean, it's complicated. I don't know how much we want to get into here, but Joshua Tree as an unincorporated community and, without really a city government. I mean, no, there was only the idea that it would be good. Because again, then you have to remember, it's very, very depressed economically when the park started. There was, so it was
seen as great. A boon to the area.
The public comment would not have been not good, yeah. Right. I mean, it was not, again, it was pre-internet, pre-really internet being out here at all. Very, very, very depressed economy. The Marine base being like the main economic driver. Even in terms of the bedroom community, with Yucca Valley and other things being the bedroom community coming up, that sprawl hadn't really happened yet. Again, if you can imagine, without internet, people were very disconnected in terms of information, like all kinds of other things. So maybe not even good phone service, so that was not a dialogue that was happening. But it has been a really good thing, I think, in the park, again, because of the protections that exist there compared to the monument. It's been, I think, really important for the area. And I have a lot of friends that work there. So.
That's good. So what was it that brought you from New Jersey to Los Angeles?
Oh my God.
To start?
Well, by way of New York City, I lived formative years in New York City as an artist. I left Rutgers University, Douglas College, where I went to undergraduate. Before I graduated, went to New York City, spent some formative years there, very involved in the alternative media scene there, art scene, and then got a job at Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions doing the video programming when I was still fairly young. And so moved to Los Angeles without really much knowledge of Los Angeles, really even much interest in Los Angeles. I kind of thought it was going to be like perspective on New York and I'd be back in New York in a moment. But I ended up actually being in LA for the first time in my life, really connecting to natural beauty. I mean, even in LA, when we think about it, freeways, whatever, there's tremendous amounts of natural beauty there. And I really connected to that. And I liked the art scene. It was not as sectioned off and siloed off as it was in New York. People really worked more across areas, and my work's always been interdisciplinary, so that really attracted to me. The queer scene in LA, specifically the lesbian scene, was really cross-cultural, cross-racial. That really appealed to me. So I ended up liking LA a lot more than I thought it would. And then had these friends that came out here and immediately just really loved it out here, and had a really important project that was called Mauve Desert. It was an interactive CD-ROM, interactive cinema piece. And that I wrote it out here. Yeah, it changed kind of my life around. So I always say, like, the desert really completely transformed me in so many ways.
I feel like it just does that. It brings you here, draws you here. I had a similar feeling of when I got here. I visited with friends for the very first time, and it was just instantaneous. And 3 months later, I was living here.
I don't think that's the way for everybody.
No. I don't think so either. It was a long time coming, on some of us, I think. Yeah.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, it was, and it's still, I think I'm still just in the beginnings of the desert working its way through me and, doing what it does. Talk to me about your tarot deck that you have, and you created it, right? And
I did. Yeah. So I have my Eco Tarot deck. My current sort of primary creative project is where I perform. I call them performances, but I offer readings of people's climate futures out in public spaces with this Eco Tarot deck. So it's a proper tarot deck, 78 card, minor arcana, major arcana, etc. But it's basically a way to channel some of the science and also ecological values and other things sort of in a system that maybe people are going to be possibly more open, kind of more receptive to receiving and also sharing, what they're thinking of. All my work is actually in some ways about provoking a kind of deeper dialogue with people than we might normally be able to have if I just, went up to you as a stranger.
Right.
And so it took me 2 years to make the deck. It's all handmade paper. It's made with agave paper and recycled cotton and linen. And it has all natural pigments that I ground up and painted on. And then, so it's very beautiful. I've done more than 600 readings all around the world now.
Wow.
And I just got back from Dallas from EarthX. I was in the Joshua Trinial. It's been a great project, actually. It's been continuing into the future. Yeah.
How do you get to travel with that? Do people just hear about it then from seeing you at other events and say, oh, you need to come to this, or we need to have you, or is it a combination of that and then you seeing other events where you feel it would be appropriate to be a part of?
Yeah, exactly. It's a combination of being invited places and then also seeking out opportunities. Yeah, exactly. The EarthX thing was great. My school, which has a School of Sustainability, which I'm affiliated with, usually with this EarthX, it's a big expo. Usually they have some scientist or engineer talking about water management in their booth. And this year they had me reading people's climate futures. So
that's really cool.
Yeah, well, it was because it really shows that the scientists and engineers that I work with, they get that it isn't just about churning out the data. It's like we have to understand a way to connect with people's hearts and their spirits in order for the larger cultural change to happen, to think about trying to mitigate some of the challenges that we're all going to experience in different ways based on this human-driven climate disruption. So they're getting that art is a way to do that. And so I was really excited to be the project. And I did more than 60 readings in Dallas.
Oh my gosh.
Really, yeah.
That's amazing.
Still recovering. I did more than 50 during the Trinial as well. And I had a little cave set up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there is a certain amount of energy that's required to do that. And I read that your mom was a psychic.
She was, yeah.
Yeah. So do you feel like you're, channeling some of that too?
Well, it's funny. Originally, I wasn't thinking of that. I thought, well, certainly I recall her talking about it. And I had used it for the tarot as a guidance system, like making a decision or thinking about a big decision I had. Make a pro and con list, talk to some friends, draw some cards,
Right.
Yeah. But I hadn't really, and I had done it sort of amateur with myself and with friends, but I hadn't done it in any serious way. But then I gestated this project. I came up with the idea for this project. And yeah, it's funny, actually. If another friend of mine told me that she thinks that I may have stumbled onto a gift. So, yeah. But I really see it as more of a performance. And I tell people that I see the system, that the tarot, my approach to it is really as a system that helps to kind of shuffle your thoughts around or help you focus in a different way. So I always tell people I'm not going to tell them anything that they don't already know. I'm very forthright about that.
Sure.
But it is very interesting. The cards, I took 2 years to make the cards. I trust them now that they bring out the things that they bring up. They're archetypes, so they work in the way that archetypes work to trigger, kind of bring up, catalyze different kinds of thoughts. And then I think it's somewhat uncanny, like what comes up in the discussions, and also very moving. Some people weep a lot, and it's a very interesting process. I'm learning a lot about what the whole project is as I'm doing it.
Which is really cool.
Yeah. That's always
because it
the best
starts off as
project.
like one thing, and then it just kind of morphs into something else.
Totally. That's all the best projects are like that.
With that in mind, I watched, there was an interview that you had done with a thing called Life in a Bubble. It was a video online. But what you're saying about bringing the facts, if you will, and the science about climate change to speak to people's hearts, I feel that connects with something that you said in there that connected with me. And you said, how do I hold myself to account for the things that I say I want in the world? How can I cultivate more peace? How can I typed this wrong because I was transcribing it. How can I, the same values we would need to cultivate to turn things around are the same values we need to cultivate to help each other out of the shithole we've dug. So we might as well just cultivate those values, and that being simplicity, humility, cooperation, frugality, mercy. Just be thoughtful about, I'm affecting other people, the land, and the things that I touch.
That's a good quote.
It's an excellent quote. So can we dig into a little bit about those values of simplicity, humility, cooperation, frugality, mercy, and how, I mean, does that tie into what you're seeing with reading in these tarot or the climate change readings that you're giving people, that it affects them to realize like what they're doing is affecting their brothers and sisters, if you will?
Sure. I mean, one of the main things, Dawn, is really seeing how everybody is really thinking about these issues. So it's not, that's been really interesting to me, because I think I might have thought that maybe it was some marginalized, smaller group and things aren't changing because everybody's not paying attention. I mean, it's actually been not just here in Joshua Tree, but as I travel and the type of people that sit down. I've had biker chicks and air conditioner repairmen and people that I never would have imagined are thinking really deeply because they're living in the world and they feel that experience and they have friends that are all over the world and, you know, their businesses are being affected, whatever it is. But people get that this change is happening and also are wondering what they personally can do about it because it does feel so big. And a big part of the emotions, the complex emotions that it brings up is that sense of not knowing where to start, being confused about how anything, any small thing, oh, I try to do this, I try to do that, how's it helping anything? Right. And again, the way that we can see the ways that our culture is organized around convenience and efficiency, and those are not necessarily the things that are going to help us in the long term turn this stuff around, because we can't be thinking about how fast we can get somewhere. I mean, even just that simple thing of slowing down in your car actually saves gas, you know? So the values that cut through our culture, and I'll speak specifically to American culture, are really the opposite to what we need to be doing if we actually do care about what's happening with the planet. So that's going to be a lot of change. I mean, again, I'm really trying to align myself with that way. I feel very, very humbled because I realize, like, I'm thinking about this all the time, and I haven't made a lot of the radical changes that I know need to be made in order for those things to really be carried out. So this project, other projects I do, they really do start with me examining myself very deeply and understanding the ways where the gaps are, you know, and the cracks and all the other things that my intentions fall through. And understanding that I'm part of a larger world, that it isn't just my failings, that's probably things that other people are feeling. And the nice thing about the Eco Tarot is it's a place where there's a space of focus. Sometimes it means that people are releasing their ecological grief. Sometimes I'm able to leave them with some resolve to do something that they were thinking about doing anyway. Sometimes it is about kind of bringing some values forward, or there's some cards in the court cards, they all map to ecological heroines. So there's some like pedagogical effort to think about some women that have been doing work in the world for decades around this stuff, and people write their names down and kind of maybe go research around them. So there's lots of different layers to the project. I think people get different things from it depending on what they're open to hearing and what they want to take away as well. Have you ever had a tarot reading?
Number of times.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I have a couple of decks that I use on a regular basis to kind of like, what should I be expecting today?
Yeah,
what should I pay attention to today?
Right.
Or I need to make this decision. What should I be thinking about around that? So yeah, I'm totally on board with that. It's been a while since I've had a reading that you would go and actually pay a person to do. Yeah.
Right. Well, I should say that I always offer my readings for free. If people insist to give me something, I always say they can give me a non-monetary donation.
Nice.
So, and that's mainly because I see it as my art practice.
How did science intersect with your art? Do you remember what that moment was like, or what led to it moving in that direction?
So I started out as math major, and I've always been really good with math and science. And I took physics instead of typing when I was young, and so I still type with one hand. I mean, I've always been really like both interested in, I'll say, the world of facts and numbers and logic and the unknown. And so my work in computer and media arts was really bringing engineering and art together. And science, though it's very different from engineering, was the next step. And then I got more involved with sustainability specifically as things have taken shape in our world, that has been affecting me more and more, again, because of my affinity for the desert. And then also at ASU, we have this school of sustainability that I guess is maybe 12 years old now. It was the first one in the country. And they hired a ton of scientists who are all working around all different aspects around issues around climate. And those people were really interesting, and they wanted to work with artists. And so this project, and really working across the deeper science, because they were all throwing me research and stuff, I mean, it really emerged from lots of research and conversations, and having them kind of vet the science that I was using in the decks, and other things. But all my work's always been interdisciplinary. In fact, I couldn't ever understand why people even taught things in separate disciplines. I remember saying to my college professors, why is art and philosophy and literature taught separately? It all happens at the same time, So, so it never really made sense to me to have such definite borders between things. So I'm very happy now that there's more interdisciplinary artwork and other kinds of activity going on. That's made me feel more at home in the world.
Well, and to your point, using art can often help some of the stuff that feels hard about science maybe fall away a little bit. It makes it less mysterious. Or, science, I was okay with science in school. I was not okay with math in school. I was more on that side of the English and the art and stuff like that. But I think when you can combine something that maybe is a discipline that people kind of struggle with art, it makes it a little easier to understand, or breaks down some things.
That's definitely the idea. There's this thing called STEAM, which STEM is science, technology, engineering, math, and there's a big push for that in schools, and there's a desire to integrate art in that. They call it a STEAM movement. I mean, I would say, sure, that's definitely one aspect, but that's like having a utilitarian idea about what art is instead of a transformation-like idea about it. And so I guess part of what I see art doing actually is problematizing those narratives. So even though I'm all for science and facts, I also think it's one layer and one way of knowing, and art is another way of knowing, and spiritual connections another way of knowing, like storytelling. These are ways of knowing. One's not more valid than the other. I mean, we have pendulum swings throughout history, how our culture sees them as more valuable than the other, but they're all important for us to pull together. And so I see the way that there's a nice way that there's a bunch of questions that come from putting art alongside science, and also similarly science alongside art. So that's an exciting, messy place for me. When we can really get into it, but for sure there is also a making the world a prettier place for nicer PowerPoint slides, or or easier to digest, sad information about the planet going down the...
So when you're at ASU and you're in Phoenix, in Arizona, in a different sort of desert atmosphere, talk to me about some of the differences of being there and being here. Obviously, population is one, because Phoenix is a lot busier than it is here in Joshua Tree. But what are some of the differences that you notice when you're not here?
I mean, that's definitely a huge one. I mean, Arizona and California, very different. Very, very different.
Yeah.
So, lots of differences. I mean, one thing is, I'll just say, just without changing anything, I'm about 25% more stressed just being in that urban context. And, again, how fast people drive, how scheduled everything is. I really like the space that I have here. Not that things aren't scheduled. I mean, we made a schedule to meet together, but... I like that here there's a way that there's a culture that supports hanging out with your friends, bumping into people, meeting new people, getting kidnapped to go off to some crazy place, whatever it is. That may seem, I don't know, old-timey or something, but that culture, which I see as even different from LA or other places in California, so I don't necessarily designate it. I think it's maybe more urban, rural, but also specifically the way that people have intentionally entered into this place, and one of the cultures that exists out here really values those things, and I really love that. I mean, I love that I go out to hear live music all the time here, or also myself, put myself out in different ways to try different things out in open mics or as part of community things, or just showing up. And I try to bring that into things there, but because I'm a professor there, there's a lot of hierarchies that I fit into in the university. Yeah. There's expectations around those things. So I kind of shed all that stuff when I'm out here. And I bring my students out here and I still keep it shed. Like that to me is a big part of how they see me out here as well when they come out. So, yeah.
Any other differences that you notice besides that?
I mean, the sprawl is not a small thing, you know, and again, we're affected by it now. We can't pretend that Yucca Valley is not inhabiting and digesting. I always feel like it's like the sacrificial zone or something, which is terrible. Right. But yeah, the sprawl is just, it's incredible, and just how... And let's see, I mean, among the good things, there's a lot of Spanish spoken there. I mean, I can go places where there's a lot of Spanish spoken. There are some pretty cool parks in the middle of the city, and I like that urban rural thing. My university is great. I mean, that's an amazing access point for incredible cultural exchange. People come in from all over the world, intellectual exchange. The depth of engagement I have with my students and the facilities we have there, all of those things. I mean, again, that's kind of an urban environment, but that's kind of partly why I love having the associations with the university and, you know, my gig. It's not just going in the clock and getting the money. It's really like, it's a whole community of thinkers and people that are also trying to think through how do we offer great education to students for as little money as we can. You know, there's a purposefulness around that.
Well, believe it or not, it's 30 minutes.
How's that possible?
I don't know. It's been going so great. Before you go, what I'm going to ask you to do is select 4 numbers between 1 and 50, and we will come back on the other side of this portion of the podcast and answer those questions for the Patreon subscribers, who I appreciate so much for their support of the podcast.
Yes, thank you, Patreon subscribers. Let's see. So 4, 17, 36, and 39.
39. So I'm going to read those questions. What was the last gift you gave someone? In your lifetime, has there been a relationship or job you stayed in too long? How did you decide to move on? Ooh, that sounds juicy. How has being in the desert changed you? And finish this sentence. The world would be a better place if. So if you would like to hear Adriene's answers to those questions, go out to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and check out the Patreon option. You'll have access to not only Adriene's questions or answers, I always do that, but all of the answers of all of the women who have been interviewed on the podcast since the beginning of the year. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dawn.
So I recently had some stickers of the Desert Lady Diaries logo made. The logo, by the way, was created by Desert Lady Kimberly Sikora. She was one of the early episodes, I think number 3. If you'd like 1 or 2 or more, head over to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, then on the yellow donate button to use PayPal, debit, or credit. The stickers are $2 each. Please put your mailing address in the comments, and I'll get them in the mail to you with a personalized thank you note this week. Shout out to Corona in Utah for being the first sticker purchase, and to new Patreon supporters, Sabrina. I appreciate you, Sabrina. Thank you. Adriene got some juicy questions, so if you want to hear her answers, head over to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and become a Patreon supporter. You'll not only have access to Adriene's answers, but to all the Diary Unlocked episodes since the beginning of the year. And if you support the podcast through Patreon, check out the special note I sent this week. Your sticker is free. Just send your mailing address to desertladydiaries@gmail.com or reply with a message through Patreon, and I will get those out to you. Last, if you like sci-fi or want to give it a try, my friend Jean-Paul is here to tell you a little bit about his podcast, Simultaneous Times.
Science fiction stories and interviews blasting straight out of the Mojave Desert and beyond. Space Cowboy Books presents Simultaneous Times Podcast, free to stream on your favorite podcast player. Find out more at spacecowboybooks.com, and be sure to visit our store in Joshua Tree, California.
See you back here next week. Thank you so much for listening.